It started on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind that makes you feel like the world was made just for you. The mist was still hanging lazily above the lake, and the sun hadn't fully burned through the soft gold hues on the water. I was sitting on my dock, coffee thermos at my side, fishing rod in hand, and not a worry in the world. My dog, Moose, a big lumbering Labrador, was laid out next to me, his tail occasionally thumping when he heard the splash of fish. This was peace. This was why I bought this property, to get away from city noise, people problems, and the petty politics that always seemed to follow. Little did I know, those petty politics were about to find me anyway. Her name was Karen. Of course it was. And not just any Karen, but the president of the Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association. Clipboard, aviator sunglasses, short bob haircut that was sharp enough to slice through drywall, and that thin, condescending smile that barely concealed her need for control. She first showed up on my dock unannounced, which already rubbed me the wrong way. No knock, no call, just the distinct click-click of loafers on wood planks. I looked up, half expecting a neighbor with a good morning or maybe a new friend looking to talk fishing. Instead, I got, "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop fishing immediately." I blinked. "Excuse me." She gestured to the water with her pen, like she was some kind of judge presiding over a courtroom. As per Section 3, Subsection 4 of the Lakewood HOA Agreement, fishing from the shoreline is strictly prohibited unless approved by the HOA board. Now, keep in mind, I bought this property in cash. It wasn't some tiny parcel inside a cookie-cutter neighborhood. I own the entire shoreline on this side of the lake, 10 acres of prime, private land. I built the dock myself, planted every tree, paid for every inspection, and made damn sure when I closed the deal that the HOA had zero rights over anything on my property. I set my rod down gently and stood up. "Ma'am, this is my dock, my lakefront. I own this side. You might want to double-check your rules." That was the first time she gave me the look. You know the one. The "how dare you question me" glare, mixed with just enough forced calm to mask the twitching rage beneath. The lake is part of a shared ecological preserve. Your activity, especially with hooks, could be endangering local wildlife. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Karen, I've been fishing here for 4 years. Nobody said a word." She huffed. "Well, the HOA has new leadership, and under my term, we're going to enforce things properly. I'll be documenting this." And she did. Over the next week, I received no less than 3 letters from the HOA, each escalating in passive-aggressive intensity. One mentioned possible fines. Another warned of repeated non-compliance consequences. The third included a poorly photocopied version of the HOA rules with the fishing ban underlined in pink highlighter. The problem? None of those rules applied to me. My land wasn't part of the HOA. My house was grandfathered in decades before the association even existed. The developer made sure to carve out exceptions for larger estates like mine to keep big-ticket buyers interested. But Karen either didn't know or didn't care. Instead of responding immediately, I started digging. I went to the county office, pulled every record attached to my property, and highlighted every line that reinforced my ownership. I printed maps, environmental use rights, and legal carve-outs. I even contacted the attorney who oversaw my purchase to double-check. He confirmed, "You own the shoreline outright. The HOA has no jurisdiction." Perfect. I was ready for round 2. The next Saturday, I went right back to my dock. But this time, I added a touch of spice. A new chair, a cooler full of cold drinks. I even brought Moose a little kiddie pool to splash around in. And wouldn't you know it, right on cue, here came Karen again, storming down the trail like a referee about to throw a flag. "This is your final warning," she snapped, holding her phone up like she was filming me. I smiled and held up my own stack of papers. "Actually, Karen, this is your final warning. You're trespassing. This is private land. These documents prove I own the shoreline, the dock, and every damn fish in this lake if I want them." She narrowed her eyes. "We'll see what the board has to say about this." She stomped off. That afternoon, I noticed a brand new sign posted just off the road near my entrance. Notice, fishing prohibited. HOA rules enforced. Fines apply. It was staked on my land. The nerve. So I pulled it out, walked to her house, and dropped it politely on her front porch with a note that said, "Next time you litter on my property, I'll bill you for disposal." You'd think that would be the end of it. Nope. The next week, things escalated. She showed up again, but this time she wasn't alone. Two men in matching blue polo shirts stood beside her. Lakewood Security Patrol, an HOA hired service mostly used to monitor the tennis courts and ensure nobody was parking in front of fire hydrants. Real neighborhood, mall cop types. Karen pointed at me dramatically like she was directing traffic. "That's him. Fishing again. Unauthorized." The shorter of the two officers approached. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints. You'll need to pack it up." I took a sip of my coffee and looked him in the eye. "This is private property. Do you have jurisdiction here?" He hesitated. "We're just here to ask you to comply voluntarily, sir." "Great. I'm voluntarily choosing not to." Karen exploded. "Then we'll be forced to escalate this. You're breaking rules." I stood up. "I'm breaking your rules on my land, which doesn't follow your rules. You're welcome to leave before I call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing." The security guards exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to do. Karen shrieked something about writing a report and stormed off. After that, I made a decision. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about standing up to entitled behavior, about drawing the line, literally and legally. Karen wasn't just misinformed. She was drunk on power. And if she won a battle, she was going to get one. After the showdown with the HOA patrol, I knew it was time to bring out the big guns. Karen wasn't going to back down with words. I needed legal backup. So I called up my attorney, Tom Reyes, a no-nonsense guy with a permanent squint like he was always reviewing contracts in his head. When I laid out the situation, he didn't even hesitate. "She's violating your property rights, plain and simple. Time to draw a line in the sand." The next few days were a flurry of paperwork and preparation. Tom helped me draft a cease and desist letter. Formal, precise, and packed with references to property law, trespassing statutes, and land use rights. We made sure to document everything. Photos of the illegal sign Karen posted, time-stamped images of her stepping onto my dock, and copies of her ridiculous HOA violation letters. I even handed over security camera footage from my front porch, catching Karen leaving notes taped to my door in the dead of night. The cease and desist was sent by certified mail and hand-delivered for good measure. Karen, of course, responded like only a true HOA tyrant could, by doubling down. Not a week later, I heard from neighbors that she'd started spreading rumors that I was polluting the lake with fishing bait and creating a safety hazard with my dock. She even said my dog, Moose, was aggressive and unlicensed, which was laughable. Moose is basically a walking teddy bear. He once got scared by a floating leaf. But here's the kicker. Karen wasn't content with gossip. She tried to organize a neighborhood petition to enforce community standards, despite the fact that I wasn't in the HOA at all. I caught wind of an upcoming HOA meeting where she planned to vote on formal sanctions against me. That was my moment. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to nuke this thing from orbit. I showed up to that HOA meeting wearing my best flannel, boots still dusty from my garden, and a thick binder tucked under my arm. The clubhouse was packed. Dozens of residents sitting in those uncomfortable folding chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee, and bracing themselves for another 2-hour Karen rant. I walked in and got a few curious stares. Some people recognized me as the guy with the dock. A few nodded cautiously. Karen saw me and immediately narrowed her eyes. "This meeting is for HOA members only," she snapped from the front. I smiled and held up my binder. "I'm here to address an ongoing legal dispute involving the HOA leadership. Given that the HOA has been encroaching on my private land, I believe it's relevant to everyone here." Some murmurs followed. Karen, clearly uncomfortable, tried to shut it down. "We're not opening the floor to non-members." One of the board members, a younger guy named Dennis, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, spoke up. "Let's hear what he has to say. This issue's been on the agenda for 3 weeks." I walked up front, opened my binder, and began laying it all out. Copies of my deed, maps from the county assessor's office, official land use permits, letters from my lawyer, and a direct quote from the development agreement that stated, in no uncertain terms, that my property was never part of the HOA. I handed copies to every board member. A few residents leaned forward, clearly fascinated. Others looked over Karen, who had gone pale and was suddenly very, very quiet. I own the Shoreline, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. The dock is on my land. The HOA has no right to post signs, send security, or issue violations. Any further attempts to enforce rules here will be treated as harassment and trespassing. And I have the legal backing to pursue charges if this continues. Karen tried to recover. We were only trying to protect the lake. We assumed. Exactly. You assumed. And your assumptions don't override the law. That was the first time I saw doubt creep into Karen's armor. A few board members whispered to each other. One even asked for a copy of the development plat to confirm for their records. Another neighbor, an older man in the back, raised his hand and said, "If he's not in the HOA, why are we spending time on this?" It was a win. Not the final blow, but a major shift in momentum. Karen looked furious, but couldn't argue with the paperwork. I left the meeting without another word, but I could feel the tide turning. Unfortunately, Karen wasn't done. The next week, I came home to find two men on my property, contractors in safety vests, carrying tools, and looking confused. When I asked what they were doing, one of them pointed to my dock and said, "We were told by the HOA to begin removal." Said it wasn't compliant with lake standards. I called the sheriff immediately. Deputy Long, a tall man with a slow drawl and a surprisingly sharp legal mind, showed up 20 minutes later. I explained the situation. He listened patiently, reviewed the documents I had in my binder, and then walked over to the contractors. "Boys," he said, "if you so much as loosen a screw on that dock, you'll be trespassing and destroying private property. You might want to pack up." They didn't argue. In fact, they looked downright relieved to leave. Apparently, Karen hadn't given them any paperwork, just vague instructions and a check with the HOA logo. The deputy turned to me and said, "You've got every right to be upset. Folks like her don't like being told they're wrong. But you're in the clear. I'll file a report. If she sends anyone else, call me." That night, I had a new sign made and posted it right next to my dock. Private property. Shoreline and dock privately owned. No HOA access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Karen, predictably, came by the next day and took a picture of the sign. She then had the audacity to try putting up another HOA sign nearby, one that read, "Community rules enforced, no fishing." I didn't even have to act. By now, word had spread throughout the community. People were tired of her antics. One of her own board members emailed the county to report the illegal signage, and within 48 hours, a county official came by, removed it, and delivered a formal notice to Karen's mailbox, citing unauthorized posting on private land. That was the beginning of her unraveling. The next HOA newsletter, which usually featured garden tips and block party announcements, included a small note at the bottom. Reminder, HOA jurisdiction does not apply to non-member private property. Please respect all legal boundaries. That might not sound like much, but in HOA speak, that's a full-blown concession. What followed was the best part. People started showing up, not in protest, but in quiet support. Neighbors who'd never spoken to me before waved when they walked past. One couple brought me homemade brownies and said, "We've been wanting to fish on the other side too. Maybe we can work something out?" Dennis from the board even stopped by to apologize for the hassle and admitted Karen was becoming a liability. Of course, Karen still had a few tricks up her sleeve. But now I had the law on my side, the sheriff watching her like a hawk, and the community slowly starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, the guy on the dock with the dog and the fishing rod wasn't the villain after all. By now, most of the neighborhood knew the truth. I wasn't some renegade fisherman causing problems. I was the guy who stood his ground and made the HOA back off. But Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. If there was one thing I learned from dealing with her over the months, it was that she didn't know when to quit. She was a textbook power trip, unable to back down, even when every piece of evidence said she was wrong. Her final move? She filed an environmental complaint against me with the county. I got the notice in the mail on a rainy Tuesday. A formal inspection request from the County Environmental Review Board citing suspected harmful activities impacting local wildlife habitats. I just about laughed myself into a hernia. According to the complaint, I was accused of frequent fishing causing ecological disruption, unpermitted shoreline modification, and, get this, illegal dock construction endangering aquatic flora. I immediately knew it was her. The language reeked of Karenisms, overblown, dramatic, and wildly incorrect. Fortunately, I had nothing to hide. I welcomed the inspection. In fact, I invited them over with coffee and muffins. The two inspectors, Dave and Rita, arrived that Friday morning and were pleasantly surprised by my openness. I showed them my dock permits, shoreline survey, and even a fish conservation log I kept out of personal interest. I explained how I used barbless hooks most of the time and regularly picked up trash from the surrounding area, even when it wasn't mine. Rita, the more senior of the two, smiled. Honestly, this is the cleanest property we've seen this month. You even have proper setbacks for all your landscaping. We're not finding anything problematic. But the inspection didn't end there. See, part of their job included reviewing all adjacent properties and checking for potential sources of runoff or landscape violations. So they walked around the community trail, which looped behind several HOA-managed lots, including Karen's prized community garden and signposting zone. That's when things took a beautiful, poetic turn. As they documented the trail, Dave pointed out multiple infractions on HOA-managed land. Unpermitted retaining walls, improper disposal of trimmed branches, erosion around their newly planted hedgerow, which it turned out Karen had ordered installed last fall, and, most amusing of all, several illegal signs posted on land that didn't belong to the HOA. That included the infamous "No fishing" sign Karen had tried to reinstall near my dock trailhead. The inspectors took photos. Lots of them. Within a week, the county issued a notice of environmental noncompliance to the HOA. Not to me, to them, and listed Karen as the responsible party for recent landscape decisions. She was instructed to remove the unpermitted signs and rectify drainage issues within 30 days or face fines. That's when I decided enough was enough. No more playing defense. I met with Tom, my attorney, and we officially filed a civil suit for harassment, false claims, attempted vandalism from the contractor incident, and trespassing. We included photos, the cease and desist, sheriff's reports, and video footage from my porch cam of Karen putting notes and signs on my property over several weeks. It was a rock-solid case. Our goal wasn't to destroy her, just to stop the nonsense and make her feel the consequences of her actions. Word got out fast. The HOA board members received notice of the civil suit, and so did several of Karen's former allies. One by one, they started backing away. Dennis, remember him? Called me and said, "Honestly, man, we're tired of her too. She's made the entire neighborhood miserable." A few brave souls decided to act. They started a petition to recall Karen as HOA president, citing abuse of authority, misuse of funds, those signs weren't free, and repeated legal entanglements that brought negative attention to the community. The petition needed 50 signatures to trigger a vote. It got 73. The recall meeting was called for a Saturday afternoon at the clubhouse. This time, the place was packed. Standing room only. People brought folding chairs. Some even brought popcorn. Karen stood at the front, arms folded, defensive posture fully activated. Her supporters had dwindled to a handful of the usual suspects. People who liked rules for the sake of rules, not because they made sense. The HOA board allowed community members to speak before the vote. What happened next was a glorious takedown. One neighbor stood and said, "Karen, we trusted you to manage things, not police them." Another added, "You've spent more time targeting a man fishing on his own land than helping us fix our broken entry gate." A woman near the back raised her hand. "I'm a bird watcher. That man's dock is home to more wildlife than the entire park. Leave him alone." It was my turn. I walked up front, holding a tablet with drone footage I'd recently taken, sweeping shots of the lake's shoreline, property boundaries clearly marked, and footage showing just how isolated my dock really was. I paused it on a frame showing Karen's illegally placed sign inches over my property line. This is where the sign was. This is the property line. This is the trespass. Gasps. Karen stood frozen. I've never been anything but polite. But what I won't tolerate is someone weaponizing bureaucracy to bully a private citizen for doing nothing wrong. The vote was held minutes later. 83% voted to remove Karen from office. She stood, red-faced, trying to speak, but nobody gave her the floor. The board voted to bar her from holding any leadership position for 3 years. The room erupted in applause. People shook my hand on the way out. One guy even offered to buy me a six-pack. But karma wasn't quite done. A week later, Karen received county fines totaling over $4,000 for the environmental infractions and illegal signage. The HOA board also voted to center the bill for unauthorized spending on signs and security patrols related to my case. Her grip on the neighborhood evaporated. As for me, life finally returned to normal. I went back to fishing in peace. Moose resumed his dock naps. I even restored a few weathered boards on the dock and added a bench with an umbrella mount. Most Saturdays, I'd wave to neighbors walking the trail across the lake. Some wave back now. One afternoon, while reeling in a small base, I heard footsteps on the gravel path near my entrance. I turned to see one of Karen's former allies, a quiet woman named Linda who had once glared at me from behind hedge clippers. She cleared her throat. "Hey, I just wanted to say sorry. I didn't realize how out of control things had gotten. I was wondering." She held up a rod and tackle box. "Mind if I cast a few lines from the trail edge? I'll stay well off your dock." I gave her a half smile and said, "Sure. Just don't bring a clipboard." She laughed. Moose barked in agreement. And just like that, the lake was mine again, peaceful, quiet, and finally free of the tyranny of HOA Karen.